FBI agents raided the suburban Houston home. The Department of Justice is expected to file federal charges today, including attempted damage and destruction of property, as well as possession of an unregistered firearm. Neighbors in Spring say they were surprised by the raid.
This story starts with a property tax return, a boring one. The kind of document that gets filed every year by every vineyard owner in Napa County, California, and the kind of document that no junior state auditor is supposed to find interesting on a Tuesday afternoon in February. Her name was Sarah Lynn. She was 28 years old, a junior auditor at the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. She had been on the job for 2.5 years. She lived in a small apartment in Sacramento with 2 cats and a stack of unread novels on her nightstand. On that particular Tuesday afternoon, Sarah was reviewing a routine batch of high-value rural property tax returns for the Napa Valley region. The batch contained 48 returns. Most were straightforward: established vineyards, family-owned wineries, a few corporate holdings. One return caught her attention. The property was a 220-acre estate vineyard in eastern Napa County. The return listed the property's improvement value at approximately $14.8 million, which was high, but not unusual for a vineyard of that size with a primary residence and full winemaking infrastructure. The land value was assessed in line with comparable properties. The agricultural exemption was filed correctly. What caught Sarah's attention was a renovation expense filed on a supplementary schedule. The property's owner had claimed a $4.2 million subsurface structural improvement deduction across the previous tax year. The deduction was for what the filing described as subterranean infrastructure renovation, agricultural cellar expansion, and structural reinforcement related to estate barrel storage operations. $4.2 million in subterranean construction on a single vineyard property in a single tax year. Sarah pulled the comparable filings for the rest of the high-value Napa County vineyard batch. The average subterranean improvement deduction across the other 47 properties in the batch over the same tax year was approximately $180,000. Some had filed nothing at all. None had filed anything remotely close to $4.2 million. She pulled the previous 3 years of subsurface improvement filings for the same vineyard property. The pattern continued. $3.8 million in subterranean construction the year before, $4.6 million the year before that, $3.4 million the year before that. Across the 4-year window she could pull, the property had claimed approximately $16 million in subterranean construction deductions. $16 million of underground work on a single vineyard property over 4 years. The property was owned by a corporate trust. The trust's beneficial ownership traced through 3 layers of holding entities before arriving at a name Sarah Lynn recognized from the local news. The property belonged to the family of the sitting governor of California. If you believe corruption like this should be brought into the light, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and comment exposed below. The character whose office is at the center of this case, state executive named Lawrence Tesmer, 64 years old, 2-term governor of California. Sarah Lynn did not call the FBI on her first day of suspicion. She was too junior. She did not have the authority to escalate a politically sensitive matter on her own initiative. She also, by her own later account, was not entirely sure she was looking at something real. $16 million in underground construction on a vineyard was unusual. It was not necessarily criminal. What she did was carefully document the anomaly. She pulled every related filing she could legally access. She cross-referenced the subterranean construction claims against the contractors who had filed the corresponding work permits with Napa County. She found that the contractors listed on the county permits did not match the contractors listed on the state tax filings. The county permits showed 3 small, locally based construction firms. The state tax filings showed 2 large corporate construction entities that had no public record of any work in Napa County. Sarah quietly compiled a summary memorandum and walked it into the office of her department's senior auditor in early March. The senior auditor read the memorandum twice. She told Sarah to keep the file open and to continue her routine assignments. By the end of the day, the memorandum had been forwarded to the California State Auditor's Office. By the end of the week, it had been forwarded to the FBI's Sacramento field office, marked with a request for federal jurisdictional review. By the end of March, The federal investigation that would become one of the largest public corruption cases in the state's history was quietly underway. It would take 19 months to bring the case to the point where federal agents could execute the raid that ended it. The investigation moved slowly. It had to. Cases that involve sitting state executives move slowly. Every step requires more documentation, more verification, more redundant evidence than a case against an ordinary defendant. Federal investigators were not going to bring this case to a federal grand jury unless they could prove every element of every charge to a standard that would survive years of appeals. Through that parallel structure, certain executive branch decisions had been quietly aligned with the interests of major narcotics distribution organizations operating across California, Mexico, and the Pacific Rim. The decisions were small individually. Cumulatively, they were not. State narcotics task force funding had been redirected away from certain regional operations and toward others, in patterns that consistently weakened federal-state cooperation against specific cartel networks. State prison transfer policies had been adjusted in ways that quietly favored the early release or favorable institutional placement of incarcerated individuals connected to those networks. State environmental and land use permits had been routed through expedited approval channels for shell company properties, later identified as cartel-affiliated logistics infrastructure. State licensing decisions for legal cannabis operations had been steered toward business entities that, beneath their corporate layering, served as laundering vehicles for narcotics proceeds. Each of these decisions, taken alone, looked like ordinary executive branch policy implementation. Taken together, they formed a pattern worth roughly $4.8 billion in cumulative value to the criminal organizations that had benefited from them across the 12-year window. A portion of that value had flowed back to the governor and his inner circle through a layered network of shell companies, offshore consolidation accounts, and luxury real estate. The wine country property was the largest single physical asset in the chain, and buried beneath the Vineyard, $16 million deep in subterranean construction across 4 years of tax filings, was the place where the chain physically ended. A vault. The man who had built the operation from the inside of state government was the governor's longtime chief of staff, Andrew Calderon, 57 years old, 20-year political operative, 2-time chief of staff. The kind of man who knew where every body in Sacramento was buried, because by his own quiet account, he had buried most of them himself. Calderon had run the parallel structure for the full 12-year window. But Calderon, like every other operational figure in cases like this, was not the architect. He was the implementer. The architecture, the system that allowed 12 years of executive branch decisions to be quietly aligned with cartel interests without triggering federal corruption investigations sooner, had been designed by someone with deep prior federal experience. Her name was Patricia Estes Vaughn, 66 years old, former Associate Deputy Attorney General at the United States Department of Justice. Before that, 14 years as a senior counsel in the DOJ Public Integrity Section. Before that, 11 years as a federal prosecutor in the Northern District of California. Patricia Estes Vaughn had spent 30 years on the federal side of public corruption prosecution. She had personally led investigations into governors, mayors, judges, and senior executive branch officials across the United States. She had written internal DOJ guidance documents on the prosecution of cartel-influenced political networks. She knew, better than almost anyone alive, what federal corruption investigators looked for, how they built cases, and what kinds of operational patterns they were trained to recognize. She had retired from federal service 11 years earlier. Within 8 months of her retirement, she had been quietly retained by Calderon as a private strategic advisor. The retention was not documented in any public filing. It existed entirely inside the encrypted communications archive that federal investigators would eventually recover. Inside that archive, her code name was The Counselor. A message in the archive, written 6 years into the operation, read, "Federal corruption investigators do not look for everything. They look for the specific things they have been trained to look for. Our work is to make sure that what we are doing does not appear on any of those lists." Lawrence Tesmer held the executive authority. Andrew Calderon implemented the decisions. Patricia Estes Vaughn had built the system that allowed 12 years of state executive decisions to be steered by cartel interests without ever appearing on a federal corruption pattern recognition radar, until a junior auditor in Sacramento decided to look closely at a Vineyard's tax return. The raid happened at dawn. At 4:48 a.m. on a Thursday, a federal judge in the Eastern District of California signed simultaneous search and arrest warrants for 19 locations across California, Nevada, and the Bay Area. At 5:14 a.m., the order went out. Execute. The dawn timing was deliberate. The governor was at the wine country estate that morning. He had a public schedule clear until a fundraising event scheduled for early evening in San Francisco. The estate's private security rotation was at its weakest in the hour before sunrise. The Vineyard's distant location from the main road meant that the only people who would see the federal vehicles arriving were the people already inside the property. FBI and DEA tactical teams approached the property through the access road and through a secondary tactical entry point along the Vineyard's eastern fence line. The estate's private security personnel were secured without incident. Federal agents entered the main residence at 5:36 a.m. Governor Lawrence Tesmer was inside the residence. Federal engineering teams then proceeded to the property's wine cellar, which the team had mapped extensively during the preceding 19 months through subpoenaed construction records and federal infrastructure survey data. Beneath the wine cellar's primary barrel storage room, behind a concealed hydraulic locking concrete panel, agents accessed the vault. The vault was approximately 2,400 square feet of finished climate-controlled subterranean space. Inside, agents recovered the following: approximately $84 million in U.S. currency, banded and shrink-wrapped, approximately 280 kilograms of gold bullion, financial records covering the full 12-year window of the operation, a leather-bound coordination ledger documenting every decision made through the parallel structure, with corresponding entries for the cartel-side beneficiaries, offshore banking documentation tied to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein, and a smaller hidden compartment containing 4 foreign passports, 3 in different names, for the governor and his immediate family, 15 additional locations including the governor's official Sacramento residence, the offices of 3 senior gubernatorial policy advisors who had been operating as intermediaries between Calderon's office and the cartel-affiliated business entities, the registered offices of 9 shell companies across California and Nevada, 2 regional coordination properties in Southern California, and the private residences of 3 corporate intermediaries who had managed the offshore consolidation accounts. By 9:14 a.m. that Thursday morning, 52 individuals were in federal custody: Lawrence Tesmer, Andrew Calderon, Patricia Estes Vaughn, 6 senior gubernatorial advisors and policy aides, 3 senior state task force funding officials whose decisions had been routing through the parallel structure. Assets frozen domestically, $1.6 billion. Offshore accounts flagged through international cooperation agreements, an additional $1.8 billion under active legal proceedings. 2 additional residential properties in Carmel and Lake Tahoe, and the layered corporate holdings tied to the operation were placed under federal seizure orders. The California State Auditor's Office announced an immediate operational audit of executive branch decision-making protocols across narcotics task force funding, corrections institutional placement, environmental and land use permitting, and state cannabis licensing. The California State Legislature scheduled emergency hearings on the structural integrity of executive branch oversight mechanisms. The U.S. Department of Justice Public Integrity Section announced a parallel audit of post-employment restrictions for senior federal corruption prosecutors entering private practice. I want to come back to Sarah Lynn, because there is something I think gets lost in cases of this scale. The numbers are enormous: 52 arrests, $4.8 billion in corruption value, a sitting governor in federal handcuffs, a vault beneath a vineyard, a former senior federal corruption prosecutor as the architect of the operation she had once been responsible for prosecuting. But the case did not begin with any of that. It began with a junior state tax auditor in Sacramento on a Tuesday afternoon in February, looking at the supplementary schedule on a vineyard's property tax return and noticing that the subterranean construction deduction was $16 million too high. She did not have to keep looking. She did not have to compile a memorandum. She did not have to walk it into her senior auditor's office knowing exactly whose property she was about to flag. It did not survive a junior auditor with a habit of looking carefully at one row of a spreadsheet. If a corruption network this large could operate for 12 years inside one of the most heavily monitored state executive branches in the United States, moving $4.8 billion in cartel value through state decision-making while every formal oversight mechanism functioned as designed. How many other Vineyard tax returns are sitting in batches tonight, waiting for someone like Sarah Lynn to read the supplementary schedule carefully enough to notice that the numbers do not match?